Millionaire CEO laughs. Find the error. I'll pay $10 million. The shy waitress solves it instantly. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main characters. Jack Anderson sat at the luxurious corner table of the high-end Manhattan restaurant, his fingers tapping impatiently on the table as he checked his phone for what felt like the 100th time. The room was filled with the hum of quiet conversations and clinking glasses, but Jack barely noticed. He had long since grown bored of the million-dollar deals and the endless sea of people vying for his attention. At 35, Jack had everything a man could want: wealth, power, a reputation that stretched across multiple industries. Yet, in his eyes, something was missing. That something, however, was not going to be found at this dinner. Tonight, he had agreed to a ridiculous arrangement. A blind date. He was here because his best friend Marcus had convinced him that he was turning into a machine, that the man who had once dreamed of changing the world had become little more than a ruthless CEO, obsessed with business and oblivious to anything else. One date, Marcus had promised. Just one. If you hate it, I'll never mention your personal life again. Jack had reluctantly agreed, though it didn't make it any easier to sit here, watching time tick away, waiting for some woman he didn't even know. Ridiculous, he muttered under his breath, swirling his whiskey around in his glass. Jack had no interest in surprises, especially not surprises that disrupted his carefully controlled life. He was used to making decisions with the click of his fingers. There were no surprises in the world of business, no room for the unknown. He wasn't the type of man who let his guard down, not even for a blind date. The minutes dragged on, and his irritation grew. Finally, just as he was about to send another text, the waitress approached. She was young, no older than 25, with dark hair pulled back into a simple ponytail and a professional smile. "Good evening, Mr. Anderson. I'm Sophie, and I'll be taking care of you tonight," she said, setting a glass of water in front of him. Jack barely glanced up from his phone. He had no time to entertain waitstaff. "I'm waiting for someone," he replied curtly, not bothering to make eye contact. Sophie nodded and turned to leave, but there was something about her that caught Jack's attention, a subtle confidence in the way she moved, a quiet strength behind her words that made him pause. It was a far cry from the usual fake smiles and scripted pleasantries he was accustomed to from people in her line of work. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. She returned to his table a few minutes later, and Jack finally looked up, ready to place his order. But Sophie spoke before he could say anything. "Have you heard from your guest, Mr. Anderson?" she asked, her voice calm but knowing. "No," Jack replied, frustration seeping into his tone. "And if you're wondering, yes, I'd like the ribeye, medium rare, and another whiskey neat." Sophie nodded and started to leave, but Jack called out to her before she could. "Wait, I need you to help me with something." Sophie paused, turning back. Jack, who had never been the type to ask for help from anyone, now felt an unfamiliar need to test something. "I've got a challenge for you," he said, a smirk forming on his lips. "Find the error in this financial analysis, and I'll pay you $10 million. Sophie's brow furrowed slightly as she approached his table. "I'm not sure I understand, sir," she said, her voice steady. Jack handed her a sheet of paper, filled with numbers and financial projections. "I want you to find the error. I'm sure it's too complicated for someone like you, but I'll pay you $10 million if you find it." Sophie glanced at the paper, then back at him, before taking a deep breath. She sat down, ignoring his mocking tone, and began to study the numbers carefully. Her fingers hovered over the page as she ran her eyes over the figures. It didn't take long before she identified the mistake, a small miscalculation that would have cost Jack millions if left uncorrected. Without missing a beat, she looked up at him, her expression calm. "You've miscalculated the projected return on investment. The numbers don't add up," she said simply, pointing out the error. Jack was frozen for a moment, staring at her with disbelief. This woman, who he had initially written off as just another waitress, had found something that his team of top analysts had missed. His smirk faded, replaced by a genuine curiosity. "How did you?" he started to ask, but Sophie interrupted him before he could finish. "I studied finance, Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice steady. "But I had to leave school to take care of my family. I guess you could say I learned more about numbers than most people realize." Jack sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had underestimated Sophie, and now he had no choice but to acknowledge her intelligence. "I guess I owe you $10 million, he said, though there was no hint of amusement in his voice. Sophie gave him a polite smile, but didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving Jack with a new respect for the woman he had so casually dismissed. As the evening wore on, Jack found himself watching Sophie more than he intended. Her movements were graceful, her demeanor quiet but confident. There was something about her that intrigued him, something he hadn't seen in anyone else. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had something more to offer. And for the first time in a long while, Jack realized that the power he thought he had was nothing compared to the strength hidden beneath the surface of someone like Sophie. The evening wore on, and Jack couldn't shake the image of Sophie from his mind. He had seen countless people like her before, the invisible ones who were easily dismissed and underestimated. But Sophie was different. There was something in the way she moved, in the calmness of her demeanor, that made Jack pause. As the dinner progressed, Jack found himself glancing over at her more frequently, his mind racing with questions. How could someone like her, someone who worked in a place like this, have such an understanding of financial matters? He had met many highly educated people, even those with Ivy League degrees, but none had impressed him quite like Sophie. She was different. Sophie continued to do her job with grace and efficiency, moving through the restaurant with the ease of someone who had been doing this for years. Despite the constant hum of conversation around her, she remained focused, checking on tables, taking orders, and always keeping a professional smile on her face. But Jack couldn't ignore the nagging curiosity building inside him. As the night went on, he became more determined to learn more about this quiet woman who had just altered his perception of the world. As he sat at his table, slowly sipping his whiskey, Jack realized something. He was not just curious about her intellect. There was something else, something that made him want to know her better. He had spent so many years building an empire, yet somehow, Sophie's calm, unassuming presence had unraveled something in him. The questions he had about her kept swirling in his mind, but there was one question that stood above the rest. Why had she not revealed more about herself? Why had she kept her talents hidden, buried beneath the surface of this job she seemed to want to leave behind? It wasn't long before Jack found himself speaking to her again. This time, it wasn't about numbers or financial analysis. It was about her. "Sophie," he began, his voice softer than he intended, "I've been thinking." Sophie looked up, a faint smile on her lips as she approached his table. "About the error I found?" she asked, her voice steady, but there was a hint of amusement in it. Jack hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, but also about you. You're not just a waitress, are you?" Sophie paused, her eyes locking with his for a brief moment. She seemed to be assessing him, her gaze calm and almost unreadable. "I'm just someone who had to make a living," she said softly. There was a certain sadness in her voice, a heaviness that Jack could hear but couldn't fully understand. He leaned in, his curiosity taking over. "I don't believe that. You're too smart to just be someone who had to make a living. There's more to you than that." Sophie's gaze softened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she picked up the empty glass from his table and began to walk away. Jack watched her leave, a sense of frustration bubbling inside him. He didn't like not knowing. And Sophie had just become an enigma he couldn't ignore. As the night continued, Jack kept his focus on Sophie, observing her as she interacted with other customers. He saw how she treated everyone with the same respect, the same professionalism, regardless of their status or wealth. There was no pretense in her, no facade. She simply did her job, and she did it well. Jack couldn't help but feel a growing respect for her. This was a woman who had been overlooked by almost everyone in the room, but she was the one who had impressed him the most. By the time dessert was served, Jack had made up his mind. He had to know more. He stood up from his table and made his way toward the kitchen. As he walked past Sophie, he called out to her once more. "Sophie," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. She turned to face him, her expression neutral, but Jack could see the faintest trace of something in her eyes. "I know this may be a little forward, but I'd like to make you an offer," he said. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Her curiosity piqued. What kind of offer? She asked, clearly intrigued. Jack paused for a moment, weighing his words carefully. I want to offer you a chance to work for me, Sophie. Not as a waitress, but as a consultant. I need someone with your intellect and perspective. Someone who thinks differently. Someone who isn't afraid to speak the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Sophie's eyes widened, and for a moment, Jack thought she might reject his offer outright. But instead, she simply smiled, a small, knowing smile that left him wondering what was going on in her mind. I'm flattered, Mr. Anderson, she said, her tone polite but distant. But I think I'll stick to what I know. Jack stood there, momentarily stunned. He had expected a different response, maybe even a refusal, but not the cool detachment in her voice. He could sense that there was something deeper beneath the surface, something she wasn't willing to reveal just yet. I see, he said, trying to hide his disappointment. Well, if you change your mind, the offer still stands. Sophie nodded, then turned and walked away without another word. Jack watched her disappear into the crowd, and for the first time that night, he felt something. He hadn't expected: regret. Regret that he hadn't pursued her offer sooner. Regret that he had assumed he could always control the situation. As he sat back down at his table, Jack realized that Sophie had just given him a glimpse of something he had been missing in his life. It wasn't wealth, or power, or status. It was humility, and the recognition that there were still people in the world who could surprise him. And for the first time in a long time, Jack was beginning to wonder if Sophie's quiet strength might just be the one thing that could change him. The night ended, but Jack's thoughts remained fixed on Sophie, the one person who had made him question everything he thought he knew. The following days passed in a blur for Jack Anderson. His mind kept drifting back to Sophie, the shy waitress with an unexpected brilliance. He had always prided himself on his ability to spot talent, but Sophie had eluded his sharp gaze. She had quietly slipped through his radar, a woman who didn't demand attention, but somehow commanded it when it mattered most. Jack couldn't get over the feeling that there was so much more to her than she let on. It wasn't just her intelligence that intrigued him, it was the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. He had never encountered anyone like her before, someone so unassuming, yet so capable. Jack had made his decision. He wanted Sophie on his team. But he had no idea how to approach her again without making it seem like he was simply trying to buy her expertise. He respected her too much for that. The next evening, he found himself at the same restaurant, hoping to catch another glimpse of her. He wasn't sure what he expected, but as soon as he walked in, he saw her. She was moving through the restaurant, taking orders, checking on tables, her demeanor just as calm and composed as the first time he'd seen her. She seemed like she was in her element, effortlessly navigating the busy space. Jack hesitated for a moment, watching her from a distance. He didn't want to interrupt her work, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to speak with her again. This time, it had to be different. He needed to show her that he wasn't just another billionaire trying to use his money to manipulate people. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stood up and walked toward her. As he approached, Sophie noticed him and gave him a polite smile, but there was a certain wariness in her eyes. Jack couldn't blame her. After all, their last conversation had been anything but typical. Sophie, he began, his voice steady, but there was an underlying sincerity in it that made her pause. I know I might have caught you off guard the other night, but I want you to know that I wasn't just trying to impress you with an offer. Sophie raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but still cautious. I don't know what to say to that, Mr. Anderson, she replied, her tone polite but guarded. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've been thinking about what you said, about how I was trying to buy people's attention, trying to control situations. You were right, and I've realized I need to make changes in how I approach things. Sophie studied him for a moment, her gaze searching his face for any signs of insincerity. But all she saw was a man who was finally willing to acknowledge the flaws in his approach. I didn't mean to offend you, she said softly. I've been working in this industry for so long. I've seen people like you come and go. They think they can use money to fix everything, but money can't buy respect. It can't buy authenticity. Jack nodded slowly, the truth in her words resonating deeply within him. He had spent so many years thinking that power and money were all that mattered, but Sophie had shown him something different. I understand, he said, his voice quieter now. And that's why I want to offer you something. Not because I think you owe me anything, but because I believe in your talent. I think you could do so much more than just wait tables. You could be helping people, making a real difference." Sophie looked at him, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. She didn't answer immediately, instead looking down at the table for a moment, as if considering his offer. Jack could see that she was weighing her options carefully. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I've had my share of offers, but none of them felt right. I've seen what people like you can do to someone like me. It's not always what it seems." Jack's heart sank, but he knew she was right. He had made assumptions about her, just like he had about so many others. And now, he had to earn her trust. "I won't push you," he said gently. "But I do want you to know that if you ever decide you want something different, you have options. I'd be honored to have you as part of my team." Sophie looked up at him, her eyes softening just slightly. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He didn't expect her to make a decision right away, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had taken a step in the right direction. Sophie turned to leave, but Jack stopped her with one last question. "Sophie, what if I told you I could offer you more than just a job?" Sophie paused, turning back to face him. "What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Jack smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "What if I could offer you the chance to change everything? To have the freedom to pursue what truly matters to you?" Sophie stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Jack didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he was ready to face it, with Sophie by his side, if she was willing. Days passed, and Jack found himself consumed by the thought of Sophie. It was not just the way she had solved the financial problem so easily, or her unassuming demeanor that made her stand out. It was something deeper, something that stirred in him every time he thought about their conversation. He had made her an offer that, in his mind, could change her life. But he knew, from the way she had looked at him, that she was not someone who could be bought with money or promises. Jack had spent years accumulating wealth, influence, and power, but he had never been truly challenged by anyone in his life. Not until Sophie. He couldn't help but wonder if there was something more that she was capable of, something more than just her ability to see through numbers. That night, Jack decided to take a different approach. Instead of waiting for Sophie to come to him, he would take the initiative. He knew he had to offer her something that was meaningful, not just another job. He needed to show her that he recognized her worth, not just as an employee, but as a person. He had done the calculations. Sophie was a force to be reckoned with, and she wasn't someone who could easily be ignored. The next day, Jack arrived at the restaurant early, just as the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the city. He sat at the same table, waiting for Sophie to arrive. As he waited, Jack couldn't help but think about how much had changed in the past few days. He had spent so many years building his empire, but somehow, it all felt hollow now. Money, power, status, they no longer seemed to matter in the way they once had. He had met countless people who wanted something from him, but Sophie had been different from the start. She had not tried to impress him, nor had she flattered him with false praise. She had simply been herself, and that had made all the difference. Jack's thoughts were interrupted when he saw Sophie walking toward him. She was wearing her uniform, but there was a confidence in her stride that wasn't there before. It was subtle, but it was enough to make Jack's heart skip a beat. As she approached the table, Jack stood up to greet her, his expression serious. "Sophie," he began, his voice steady but filled with sincerity, "I've been thinking about our last conversation." Sophie smiled faintly but didn't say anything. She had expected this, he could tell. "I know you've probably heard offers like mine before," Jack continued. "But I want to make it clear that I'm not just offering you a job. I'm offering you an opportunity. An opportunity to do something meaningful, something that aligns with your talents and your values." Sophie looked at him for a moment, her eyes searching his face. Jack could see that she was still hesitant, but he wasn't going to back down. He needed her to understand. "I don't want you to work for me because I'm a billionaire. I want you to work with me because I believe in you," Jack said, his voice unwavering. Sophie's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Jack thought she might finally say yes. But instead, she took a deep breath and spoke quietly. "I've heard that kind of talk before. People with money, people with power, offering opportunities. But I've learned the hard way that those opportunities don't always come with the freedom to choose." Jack's heart sank, but he didn't flinch. He understood what she was saying. I get it, he said, nodding. But this isn't like that. I'm not offering you a deal where you give up your freedom. I'm offering you a chance to work on your own terms, to build something with me. Something that could change everything for you. Sophie hesitated, clearly torn. Jack could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear of stepping into the unknown. I don't know if I can trust you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. I wouldn't expect you to. Trust has to be earned. But I'm willing to earn it. I'm not asking for your trust right now, Sophie. I'm asking for a chance. Sophie stood there for a long moment, her arms crossed as she weighed his words. Jack watched her closely, giving her the space she needed to make her decision. After what felt like an eternity, Sophie finally nodded, her expression softening. I'll think about it, she said, her voice quieter now, but there was a spark of something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Jack felt a surge of relief, but he knew this was just the beginning. Sophie had not said yes yet, but she was willing to consider it. That was more than he had expected. Thank you, Jack said, his voice sincere. Sophie nodded again, then turned and walked away, leaving Jack sitting at the table, his mind racing with possibilities. As he watched her move through the restaurant, Jack realized that this was the first time in a long time he had truly felt alive. Sophie had given him something he hadn't expected, hope. And for the first time in years, he was ready to fight for it. Days passed, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something monumental. Sophie's presence had changed something in him, something he hadn't even realized needed to be changed. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his life. But Sophie had proven to him that there were things beyond his control. She was the first person in a long time who had forced him to question everything he thought he knew about success and power. Sophie, on the other hand, hadn't made a decision yet. She was still processing the offer Jack had made, and Jack respected that. He knew he had to give her space, but he couldn't help but hope she would choose to take the leap. He had seen something in her, something that made him believe she was meant for much more than being a waitress. A few days later, Jack was back at the restaurant. This time, he wasn't there just to watch Sophie from a distance. He was there to meet her, to talk to her again, and to see if she had come to a decision. He had arrived early, hoping to catch her before the dinner rush. As he sat at the table, his mind raced with thoughts of what he would say. Sophie had a quiet strength about her, a dignity that had drawn him in from the start. He had to make her see that this opportunity wasn't just about a job. It was about giving her the freedom to be who she truly was. As the restaurant began to fill with customers, Jack caught sight of Sophie. She was moving through the room with ease, her eyes scanning the tables, taking orders, and making sure everything was running smoothly. There was no hesitation in her movements. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it effortlessly. Jack stood up as she approached his table. She looked up, giving him a polite smile, but there was a cautiousness in her eyes. Mr. Anderson, she said, her voice warm but professional. I wasn't expecting to see you here today. Jack smiled back, his eyes sincere. I was hoping we could talk, he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation. I understand if you still need more time to think, but I just want to say that the offer I made wasn't just about giving you a job. It's about offering you something more, something that could change everything for you. Sophie looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. I've thought a lot about what you said, she said quietly, and I've come to a decision. Jack's heart raced, but he kept his composure. He had no idea what she was going to say, but he was ready to hear it, whatever it was. I'm not sure if I can take the job, Mr. Anderson, Sophie said slowly, her voice soft but firm. But I do want to thank you for believing in me. I've always been content with my life here, but the idea of something bigger, something more, it's hard to ignore. Jack nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I get it, he said gently. But I want you to know that this isn't just about taking a job. It's about being in control of your own future. You don't have to be limited by your circumstances, Sophie. You have the power to do whatever you want. And I want to help you get there. Sophie's gaze softened as she looked at him, and Jack saw a flicker of something in her eyes, something that made him believe she was considering it. After a long pause, Sophie spoke again. I don't know if I'm ready for something that big, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I want to try. I want to see what it's like to have a chance to do something that matters. Jack smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. That's all I'm asking for, he said. A chance. I'll be here to help you every step of the way. Sophie smiled back, a small but genuine smile that made Jack feel like he had just won something important. Thank you, she said softly. I think this could be the beginning of something great. Jack watched as she walked away, feeling a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't felt in a long time. Sophie had made her choice, and it was the right one. He knew that this was just the start of something much bigger for her, and he was excited to see where it would lead. As the night went on, Jack felt a sense of contentment that had eluded him for years. He had always believed that success was about building an empire, but now, he realized that it was about helping others reach their potential. And with Sophie by his side, he knew they could accomplish something truly extraordinary. Weeks passed, and Jack found himself more and more absorbed in his work with Sophie. She had started working alongside him, not as just an assistant, but as a partner. Slowly, she proved herself to be an invaluable asset, bringing fresh perspectives to the business that Jack had never considered before. She had a keen sense for identifying opportunities that others had overlooked, and her ability to break down complex financial concepts was beyond impressive. Jack had started to rely on her insights, and she quickly became the voice he turned to when making decisions. They worked late into the evenings, strategizing and planning the future of the company. Sophie's presence had transformed the atmosphere at the office, creating a dynamic of innovation and possibility. Jack realized that he had never felt this kind of energy before. There was a spark in the way Sophie approached challenges, a kind of quiet confidence that inspired him to rethink his own approach to leadership. One evening, as they were going over projections for the next quarter, Jack looked up from the papers in front of him and found Sophie staring out the window. The soft glow of the city lights reflected in her eyes, and Jack felt a pang of admiration. It wasn't just her intelligence that captivated him. It was the way she carried herself, the way she had turned her past struggles into something that empowered her, not limited her. You know, Jack said, breaking the silence. When I first met you, I didn't think this would work. I didn't think someone like you would ever want to be part of this world. Sophie turned to look at him, her expression soft but serious. And what made you change your mind? She asked. Jack leaned back in his chair, looking at her thoughtfully. It's not just what you bring to the table, he said slowly. It's who you are. You're not just another person trying to climb the corporate ladder. You've already made it, in a way that I never even considered. Sophie raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? Jack smiled, his eyes reflecting a new understanding. You've made it by staying true to yourself. You haven't sacrificed your values, your beliefs. You've stayed grounded, and that's something I've lost along the way. Sophie remained quiet for a moment, processing his words. I don't know if I've made it, she said, her voice quieter now. I just know that I'm doing what I can to make the best of things. I've always had to fight for what I wanted, and I guess I'm still fighting. Jack nodded, his admiration for her growing. That's what makes you different. You don't wait for opportunities to come to you. You make them happen. Sophie smiled, a small but genuine smile. Maybe, but I also know that I can't do it alone. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He knew what she meant. He had been offering her a chance, but what he hadn't realized was that she had given him a chance as well. She had shown him a side of himself he had long forgotten, a side that cared about more than just success, power, and wealth. A side that cared about people, about making a difference. You're not alone, Sophie, Jack said, his voice sincere. We're in this together. Sophie's eyes met his, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something more in her gaze. It was a quiet understanding, a connection that went beyond business. I've never had anyone believe in me like you do, she said softly. But I don't want you to do this because you feel sorry for me, Jack. Jack shook his head. It's not about pity. It's about respect. I believe in you because you've shown me what true strength looks like, and I want to help you get where you deserve to be. Sophie looked at him for a long moment, and Jack could see the wheels turning in her mind. Then, finally, she nodded. All right, she said, her voice steady. Let's do this. Let's make something incredible happen. Jack smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. This was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them had imagined. Together, they were going to change the game. Jack couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. He had no idea where this path would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. With Sophie by his side, he was ready to take on whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, discussions, and decisions. Jack and Sophie worked side by side, building the foundation of something they both believed in. Their collaboration became the heartbeat of the company, each of them bringing something unique to the table. Jack had never been one to rely on others, but with Sophie, he found himself trusting her instincts, valuing her opinions more than anyone else's. They were unstoppable. As the business flourished, so did their partnership. They spent countless hours strategizing, planning, and refining their vision. Jack admired Sophie not just for her intelligence, but for her work ethic and her ability to remain grounded, despite the success they were beginning to achieve. Sophie, for her part, had grown in ways she hadn't expected. The more she worked with Jack, the more she realized that this opportunity wasn't just about proving her worth. It was about building something that mattered, something that would leave a lasting impact. She had always been a fighter, but now she was fighting for a purpose bigger than herself. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jack and Sophie sat in the quiet of his office, reviewing the final drafts of an important business proposal. The weight of the work they had done over the past few months was starting to settle in. Sophie looked up from her papers and caught Jack's gaze. "I've been thinking," she said softly. Jack looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "About what?" he asked. Sophie paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the document in front of her. "About how far we've come. I never imagined something like this happening. I never imagined being here." Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her. "I never imagined it either," he said quietly. "But we've built something incredible, Sophie. And it's just the beginning." There was a pause, a moment of silence that felt heavier than words. Sophie shifted in her seat, her thoughts racing. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked. Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Sophie began, her voice steady. "We've been so focused on building this business. But what happens when it's built? What happens after we achieve everything we've set out to do?" Jack thought for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he considered her question. "I think we keep going. We set new goals, new challenges. We push ourselves even further." Sophie nodded slowly, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her expression. "And what about us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure what she meant by that. But as he looked at her, he realized that there was something more to their partnership than just business. He had started to see Sophie not just as a colleague, but as someone more. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Sophie hesitated, then met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for answers. "I mean, we've been working together for so long, and we've built something amazing. But I wonder if there's more to this. More to us. Something beyond just work." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had never allowed himself to think about anything beyond business. But now, in this moment, he felt a shift. He had always kept his personal life separate from his professional life, but Sophie had changed that. She had made him question his priorities. "Sophie," he said, his voice low, "I don't know what this is, but I think you're right. There's something here, something that goes beyond just what we're building. But we need to figure out what that is, together." Sophie's eyes softened, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'm not sure what the future holds, Jack. But I know that I want to find out. With you." Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him, a feeling he hadn't expected. It was a new kind of hope, a hope that wasn't just about business or success, but about something deeper. "Then let's figure it out," he said, his voice steady. Together. As they sat there, in the quiet of his office, Jack realized that for the first time in a long time, he was truly ready to face the unknown. With Sophie by his side, he knew they could navigate whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. He was excited. Sophie's presence in his life had changed everything, not just in business, but in his heart. And for the first time, Jack was ready to embrace whatever came next, not just as a CEO, but as a man who had finally found someone worth fighting for. As the weeks unfolded, Jack and Sophie's partnership only grew stronger. Their bond, forged through hard work and mutual respect, became the foundation of something bigger than either of them could have imagined. The company began to thrive in ways Jack had never anticipated. Sophie's insights, her ability to spot trends and make quick decisions, became invaluable to the team. She had earned the respect of everyone in the office, but most importantly, she had earned Jack's trust. Jack watched her grow into a leader in her own right, and as much as he had helped her along the way, he realized she had helped him just as much. The days when he would rely solely on his own judgment felt distant now. Sophie had a way of challenging him, of making him see things from a different angle. She wasn't afraid to question him, to ask the hard questions, and that made him a better CEO. But there was more to their relationship than just business. Jack found himself looking forward to the moments they spent together outside the office. Their late-night conversations, the walks through the city, the quiet moments of shared understanding. These were the moments that made Jack realize just how much Sophie had become a part of his life. She wasn't just a colleague anymore. She had become someone he couldn't imagine living without. One evening, after a particularly successful meeting with a potential investor, Jack and Sophie sat at a small cafe near the office. The city was alive outside the window, the lights of the skyscrapers twinkling in the distance. Sophie sipped her coffee, her eyes focused on the street below, but Jack could see the exhaustion in her expression. "You know," he said, breaking the silence. "I don't think I've ever said this before, but I'm proud of you." Sophie looked up, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious. Jack leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "You've come so far, Sophie. You've built something here. You've built this company, and you've helped me build a future I never thought was possible." Sophie's smile softened, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. "It's not just me," she said quietly. "You've helped me just as much. You've believed in me when no one else did. I wouldn't be here without you." Jack shook his head, his expression serious. "You've done this on your own, Sophie. You've always had the talent, the drive. I just gave you the chance to show it." Sophie was silent for a moment, and Jack could see the wheels turning in her mind. "I've been thinking a lot about what we've done together," she said softly, "and about what's next. I never thought I'd be in a position like this. I've never had the freedom to choose what I wanted to do, but now I feel like I have a choice. I want to make sure I'm choosing the right path." Jack reached across the table and took her hand in his grip firm but reassuring. "You've always had the choice, Sophie, and I'm here to support you, no matter what you decide." Sophie looked at him, her eyes searching his face, and Jack saw the vulnerability there, a side of her she rarely showed. "I don't want to disappoint you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "You could never disappoint me, Sophie. Whatever you decide, I'll be right here, supporting you. Always." Sophie's eyes softened, and she smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Jack," she said quietly. For the first time, Jack realized that what they had wasn't just about business. It was about something deeper, something that neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. They had built something together, yes, but they had also built a relationship based on trust, respect, and a shared vision for the future. As the evening wore on, they sat together in comfortable silence, the world outside fading into the background. Jack knew that whatever came next, whether it was in the boardroom or beyond, he and Sophie would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready for whatever the future had in store. Sophie had become his partner, not just in business, but in life. And that was a partnership Jack knew he would never let go of. Months passed, and the company grew in ways Jack never thought possible. With Sophie's guidance and vision, they had successfully expanded, landing major clients and creating a brand that was respected in the industry. But as the business flourished, something else had begun to change. Jack and Sophie had not only built a powerful business together, but their bond had deepened. They had become inseparable, and the respect they had for one another turned into something more, something neither of them could ignore. Their late-night conversations no longer just revolved around work. They found themselves talking about dreams, fears, and the future, not just as business partners, but as two people who had come to mean the world to each other. One evening, after another long and successful day at the office, Jack and Sophie found themselves on the rooftop of the building, the city skyline spread out before them. The air was crisp, and the soft hum of the city seemed distant as they stood side by side, taking in the view. Sophie was quiet for a moment before she spoke. "Do you ever think about how much things have changed?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Jack turned to her, his eyes softening as he gazed at her. "Every day," he replied. "But it's not just the business that's changed. It's everything. I never thought I'd be here, in this place, with someone like you." Sophie smiled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "Someone like me?" she repeated. Jack took a step closer, his voice low and sincere. Yes, he said gently. You've changed everything for me, Sophie. You've made me realize that there's more to life than just building an empire. There's more than just work. Sophie's expression softened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, with a quiet sigh, she spoke again. I feel the same way, Jack. I never expected to find someone like you. Someone who sees me for who I really am. Someone who believes in me. Jack reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The connection between them felt different now, stronger, deeper. You're everything I never knew I needed, Sophie, he said softly. And I don't want to imagine a future without you in it. Sophie looked at him, her eyes searching his face for the truth in his words. There was no doubt in her mind. She had come to the same realization. Jack had become more than just a business partner. He had become someone she couldn't imagine her life without. Jack, she whispered, I've never felt more sure of anything in my life. Jack smiled, his heart swelling with the emotion he had kept hidden for so long. Then let's not waste any more time, he said. Let's face the future together. Not just as business partners, but as something more. Sophie's smile grew wider, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. I'd like that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Jack didn't fear it. With Sophie by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they had built something incredible, and now, they were ready to build something even more extraordinary. A life where the business they had built was just the beginning of their shared journey. Jack leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a soft, tender kiss, the city lights twinkling around them like a promise of the future. It was a kiss that sealed their commitment, not just to the company, but to each other. From that moment on, Jack knew that the greatest success they would ever achieve was not measured in dollars or deals, but in the love and trust they had found in one another. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way, not as CEO and employee, but as equals, as partners, and as the two people who had finally found their way to each other.